Guy here with a quick message before we get on with the pod. As a thank you to our most dedicated and loyal viewers and listeners to Blood Red, we're inviting you to join our Blood Red Club. By joining, you'll get access to insider transfer content as well as interviews with former favourites and those connected at Anfield. All you need to do is head to bloodredpodcast.co.uk, enter your email address, and our exclusive content will head to your inbox. That's bloodredpodcast.co.uk. Thanks. Now on with the show. Hello and welcome to The Bottom Line here on the Blood Red channel, your Liverpool FC finance podcast with our business of football writer at the Echo, Dave Powell. I'm Guy Clark. Thanks for taking the time to download and listen. Coming up, we'll be speaking transfer spends. A certain Kylian Mbappe may well get a mention. We have the latest on the Anfield Road development and why FSG are so keen to press ahead. Plus, RedBird Capital and their next move into football. And what of the failed Super League? Remember that? I certainly do. Dave, we've got a lot to get through. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks, Guy. Very well, thanks. Are you?
Yeah, not so bad, thanks.
Good.
I suppose in terms of where we sit right now, it's an interesting time sort of in the football finance world because we're beginning, aren't we, to sort of see and feel the full effects of the COVID pandemic. And I suppose we don't have to look sort of too far away. Manchester United and the way in which they operate, of course, having to deliver plenty of regular updates. And I suppose the latest of them might well give us a glimpse into sort of where Liverpool are at as well.
Yeah, I mean, when the teams clubs started filing their annual accounts for 2020, it was almost a false picture because it only took into account the first 3 months of the pandemic. So for that period, although we did see a number of games moved into the next accounting period, which means you lose a significant amount of revenue, that still gets booked on for the following year. But it didn't show us quite how a lack of fans in stadiums would affect clubs. And obviously Manchester United are the only Premier League club who are a public company, so they filed their third quarterly reports. And yeah, it was quite stark. I mean, we've been braced for these heavy losses moving forward. And by the time Liverpool publish their next accounts, I fully expect that that loss that we showed this season of 46 million will increase because it will be taking into account a number of factors that simply weren't there for the first 3 months last year. So Manchester United's matchday revenue for the third quarter was down 94.5%. To kind of, I think it was 1.6 million, which is it's negligible really. There's been no meaningful crowds allowed in until the very last day of the season for Liverpool, at least Anfield, and we're starting to see that now. And also crucially for United, it was a case of they've also seen a drop in commercial revenue, about 10.5 million, I think, which is maybe pointing to some concern among corporate sponsors moving forward, because at the end of the day, while football clubs have lost money during this pandemic, so too obviously businesses, and they're possibly reassessing how they spend their money as and when deals come to an end. So I imagine we'll probably see quite a bit of that moving forward in terms of some firms. It's been, if you look at United's next corporate shirt sponsor, TeamViewer, it's basically a firm which has thrived through lockdown and had people having to remote work and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of sponsors come on board as and when they are renegotiated. But yeah, for United, their latest kind of statements for the third quarter paint a more realistic picture of where we're starting to head for COVID. I mean, because the Premier League are expecting £1.5 to £2 billion worth of losses by the end of 2021, and that probably seems to be playing out already. And no club's immune. Manchester United obviously are a commercial colossus, but still, I mean, the effects of the pandemic are far-reaching, and I imagine Liverpool will be feeling similar type of pinch when the time comes for them to publish their full year accounts, probably early next year in 2022.
Yeah, you do wonder, I suppose, if this is going to be maybe the beginning of a chain event for somewhat of a restart, because we so often hear, certainly from lower down in the pyramid, that the Premier League is awash with money, yet actually so many of these clubs are still operating at losses. And even despite that, though, Liverpool have gone out and spent the £34 million on Ibrahima Konate, that being a release clause. So they've paid that sort of straight up, I believe, Dave. And looking at it in kind of the way that Liverpool have been able to, right at the beginning of the summer, go out and spend big after securing Champions League qualification, do you think now that the expectation is that those players that are sold through the rest of the window will be recouping what's already been spent, as opposed to, I think a few people will be hoping it's going to the Kylian Mbappe transfer fund?
I imagine so. I mean, I don't think there's any football club that isn't looking at the transfer market slightly differently than they were 18 months or 2 years ago, maybe. Save for maybe Paris Saint-Germain, but when you have an asset like Kylian Mbappe, that you've already got that asset, same as they got Neymar, etc., etc. It's one of those things that I don't see there being too many clubs spending big. I mean, Liverpool, they've acted early to address a need. They saw Kabak at the end of last season. He did okay. Obviously, Nat Phillips did okay, but for the longer term, for where Liverpool need to be, I mean, they probably don't tick those boxes, which is why we see they'll probably look at that Konate fee, paying it now, and realise that they want about £15 million worth for Nat Phillips. So immediately they'll be looking at recouping that and kind of one in, one out. They're not going to be paying the fee for Kabak, which would have been around the 18 million mark, I think. So ultimately, these things start to add up, and it doesn't seem as kind of an exuberant spend as maybe it did at the start. But that's the FSG way, really, isn't it? I mean, for some it's lauded, for many it's criticised and loathed. But ultimately, for the here and now, it is how they won't be on their own in operating in that respect, which is why, kind of, you mentioned Mbappe before. I just don't see that move happening anywhere this summer. If it happens, I'll eat my words, but I just don't think there is a market to support that at present for anyone.
No, you've written recently on the Echo regarding sort of Kylian Mbappe, and I think maybe one of the biggest problems is the club he's already at in Paris Saint-Germain. I mean, I think we're just under a week or so away from him entering that final year. So I think all Liverpool fans have the calendars ready to mark off day by day the 365 days until he is a free agent. But I mean, it's one of those, isn't it? Free agent or not, this is a deal of astronomical numbers that would have to require Liverpool breaking a wage structure, which has been so sort of paramount to the success that they've actually had.
And it threatens everything else then. And ultimately, this whole story arrives at a time when clubs will start to look at their wage bills and how it rises and start to trim that back. I mean, you look at Liverpool's wage bill over the past 6 years, it's increased by, I think, 94%. And then if you look at in terms of growth to revenue ratio, and in terms of the revenue rise, the wages are growing at a faster rate than the revenue is growing, and there comes a point when it will tip that balance of being acceptable, which is seen by many about 75% mark of being manageable. And once you start getting into the 80%, 90%, and you're spending that amount of revenue on wages, where does it all lead to? You're on a road to ruin, and this is why I think they looked at the Super League as a way of, it's almost like that silver bullet. So you've got guaranteed income every year that props up all the other things that the fans want. But in reality, clubs are going to have to start thinking about what UEFA are going to do with bringing in new financial fair play, which will ultimately hamper a lot of these kind of deals. I mean, we've heard Mbappe wanting around £600,000 a week at PSG. A rough estimate, we probably imagine Mo Salah earns about a third of that at Liverpool, and he's their highest earner. It's just not feasible without entirely breaking the structure and players having to acknowledge that this one person is worth three of them in some respects. It creates disharmony, and when it comes to renegotiating new contracts, you are going to be having your feet held to the fire constantly because they believe the money's there for you to pay for these players. So I just don't see it, and I don't see how. I mean, you look at last year, Manchester City. I mean, fueled by all the money you could possibly imagine. They still balked at the Lionel Messi contract. I mean, and that's for arguably the greatest player that ever played football. Are Liverpool going to, a club notorious under FSG for thrift, going to spend that kind of money? I just don't see it. And it's the same. We see them linked with Real Madrid. That to me is bluster. I mean, Real Madrid's finances are an absolute dumpster fire. Same for Barcelona. They have a lot of short-term debt which needs servicing. I mean, having debt's one thing. If you can service debt and you're a football club, so if you look at Tottenham, for example, if you have a lot of debt, it's a lot of it long-term, and you can service it, debt isn't really an issue. It's when that debt falls in the short term and you can't meet it. So that's why Barcelona are having this £500 million restructuring plan through Goldman Sachs to make sure they stay solvent. But they have to portray that they are going after the likes of Kylian Mbappe, and they are after the best players in the world, and that they can make this happen. Next summer, who knows? If he's a free agent, then I think that for him opens up a lot more possibilities than what he'd be looking for now. I mean, where can he go now? Where would he go? Manchester City? They don't seem to be in the market for a player like that. Certainly at that kind of price. Barcelona and Real Madrid, I just don't see how you manage to spend that kind of money when you effectively don't have it, and then you had to impose wage cuts in Real Madrid's case last year on staff. It just seems that the market is kind of depressed almost to the point that I just don't see that happening this year. I mean, he said he's going to make his decision after the Euros, which is fair enough. I expect that it might be finding some kind of common ground with Paris Saint-Germain, saying I will sign a shorter term deal possibly, but really with a proviso that allows them to recoup some money for him rather than let him go on a free, but with kind of a gentleman's agreement that he will be allowed to leave next summer, maybe for a fee. Who knows? But, we're kind of surmising here, but I just don't see a scenario where, of course, Liverpool would be interested in Kylian Mbappe. There isn't a football club in the world that wouldn't be interested in Kylian Mbappe, but it just doesn't make any kind of financial sense. I mean, we've mentioned, I think I've written in the past about Nike possibly being used to leverage some kind of relationship, which isn't beyond the realms of possibility, but they would have to be doing a lot of heavy lifting in a deal like that. And Paris Saint-Germain are a Nike client, and they're a Nike client who they are betting big on at the moment through their Air Jordan brand. They're giving them more global visibility, and Mbappe is kind of core to all that, to their marketing strategy there. So I don't see how it would be really beneficial for Nike to shift him from Paris Saint-Germain to Liverpool. It's kind of for them as a marketing perspective, it'd probably be a sideways move because they have plans to Liverpool, but their plans for Paris Saint-Germain are further down the road. So yeah, so in short, I don't see that happening for Liverpool at all, and I'd be very, very, very surprised if it happened, if he went anywhere this summer other than staying at Paris Saint-Germain for at least another 12 months.
No, well, it was fun whilst it lasted. You mentioned before in terms of wage bill rising and outstripping sort of revenue coming into the club. Well, I suppose for FSG, rather than let the wages go too high before they rectify that with revenue, it will be the other way, that the scales are balanced, that they'll make sure the revenue is coming in before the wages go up. And I suppose a big part of that we should touch on is the Anfield Road redevelopment. Yeah,
I mean, it's something which is going to be a big deal for them. It's £60 million. I think it takes their spend on infrastructure past the 200 million mark after the main stand development. It's 7,000 seats increase. I mean, that goes towards servicing demand for tickets. I mean, you will always sell out Anfield for big game Premier League games. It's, the demand is there, absolutely, 100-fold probably. But it's about what else you can do with the stadium. There's going to be, while the hospitality side of the main stand proved hugely beneficial, given a £12 million lift in the first year after they completed that. There's not going to be something, they're not going to have that kind of boost with the Anfield Road development in terms of hospitality, but they are going to have corporate spaces there which they can sell. There'll be a demand for that. There'll be a banking on as we come out of the pandemic. And but again, I suppose that's question marks. Will that kind of thing, conferencing, and will that all be as it was? I mean, it's those kind of question marks. I think it's, but all this was in play before the pandemic. The big thing is obviously increasing the servicing that demand for tickets, but they'll also be trying to bring in other revenue streams through possibly hosting NFL matches by increasing the size of the pitch there if they can, in terms of moving that back. Gaelic games, I mean, they've already hosted those at Fenway Park in the past and they've been hugely successful. So possibility we might see that. I mean, we saw Elton John announce his a leg of his tour next year to be held at Anfield. I imagine there'll be another couple of concerts which will follow on from that. And possibly we might see, if they can get something done, a couple of either exhibition games or regular season games for possibly the NFL. I mean, that's what they dearly love, because that partnership that Tottenham have with the NFL is enormous. I mean, that's one of the reasons why they invested so heavily in terms of getting that stadium up and running and spending so big on it. Yes, they've been impacted probably worse than any other Premier League club through the pandemic, but they don't have an awful lot of short-term debt, which means by the time that stadiums open up and kind of consumer confidence returns, they should be able to realise the benefits further on down the line of that. But of course, that stadium is built to host NFL games. I mean, it's a retractable pitch which comes away. I mean, and it is ultimately a stadium which is designed to empty your wallet, from the beer glasses which fill up from the bottom to
the beer glasses fill up from the bottom. Your money in your wallet drains.
The money just drains out. Yeah, it literally it is an open wallet situation in that stadium, whereby there are so many things that can drain your wallet, and that's ultimately what they seek that kind of experience as. I mean, it's very American in that respect. I mean, it's I think Yankee Stadium underwent a big kind of similar redevelopment a few years back, and it was very similar, whereby it's designed to be an experience, a kind of a retail experience as much as a kind of physical and emotional experience of watching the football. And also, crucially for Tottenham, they get to keep all the revenues from the Fanatics pop-up stores that comes into the merchandise and all that. So Liverpool will see all this as a potential revenue generator. I mean, in Tottenham's case, they had two concerts there planned for last year, which were Guns N' Roses and I can't have the other one slip my mind now, but they were supposed to have a Anthony Joshua fight there as well. And all those combined would have raked in about 10 million for them. So Liverpool will be open for that type of thing from concerts, I imagine, because it was only 2019 that they kind of kick-started all that off again. I mean, they had Bon Jovi, Take That, Pink, and they want to turn it into a destination. And I wrote something earlier actually about it's kind of in FSG's wheelhouse, almost kind of that kind of thing, because they've just laid the final beam of a 5,000 seater music venue adjacent to Fenway Park. So you can. I know they say the two things are opposite all the time, but I think we've had this conversation before, Guy, where you don't have to look too far to what goes on at Boston to see how the things usually align in some way, and there's usually a kind of a simpatico relationship that's formed there. But whatever it is, they'll be hoping to make the money back on the development and then some in the longer term.
Yeah, I suppose safe to say that even the Anfield Road redevelopment for the stadium as such for capacity might well be it for a little while. But I'm sure, as you say, around Anfield and whatever they can do within Anfield to maximise, there'll certainly be little screws and nuts and bolts being twisted and turned in this way and the other to ensure profit. But let's move on then to, I suppose, the latest element of kind of the Liverpool ownership composition of RedBird Capital. Of course, it was earlier in the year that they invested that 11% stake into the club and sort of the revenues that are brought with that. But they've got sort of Toulouse and now eyeing up sort of moves in Spain as well.
Yeah, I mean, the Toulouse one was before the Liverpool deal happened. That was their first move into it. They looked at, I think it was 80 clubs, more than 80 clubs. They assessed things such as Obviously, the financial situation, the demographic, how kind of relegation-proof some of these clubs are. And they landed on Toulouse. I think they looked at quite a few in Italy. But yeah, Toulouse was the one they landed on. And they missed out narrowly on promotion this season, which is obviously a quirk of... It's one of the reasons why they kind of attest to like European football, because it's very different to how American football is. But when you miss out kind of by a goal difference, I think it was, or in the playoff game, after a season of being better than the teams around them, I think that kind of thing will probably rankle. But yeah, they made this move. It's a very small move from the outset in Spain with Malaga. Malaga in 2013, I think, were Champions League quarter-finalists. They spent a huge amount of money. They had likes of Jeremy Toulalan and Ruud van Nistelrooy, Nacho Monreal, and they built a great side. They've fallen away massively, but the ownership still remains. But it is now under the control of like a Spanish judiciary, because it's got so messy for various reasons about where money's been spent. So there is a number of interested parties in helping to move that forward, RedBird being one. So they've taken this minority stake in Malaga, and it is a tiny stake. It's a very, very small stake in a kind of the tens of thousands almost. But what that's designed to do is they're allowed a seat at the table and the board, and they're able to provide a capital injection into the club, which ultimately any prospective buyers, I think the judiciary have said, need to have a seat at the table on the board so they can be kind of vetted, and they also need to make a capital injection. So that positions RedBird for possibly making a play for full control as and when the ownership situation at Malaga gets sorted out, which it will. It won't remain as is, but RedBird, I think, will see that as their next logical step. It ticks the boxes. Alex Shiner, who's the partner, is a partner at RedBird, and he's CEO of Red Ball, the special purpose acquisition company that Cardinale and Billy Bean were trying to take a stake in Liverpool in last year. He kind of said that when they're looking at clubs and adding to the portfolio, they're looking for clubs of a similar stature, so they all feed into each other basically. So they wouldn't be interested in teams that are regional sides that would have to work their way up through the leagues. Very different to a kind of what happened with, say, Hoffenheim, or what's happened with Leipzig. It's only 10, 12 years ago, Leipzig were a very small kind of regional Liga side in Germany with several hundred fans. Now they're kind of Champions League side year after year. So I think Malaga and Toulouse you can see the similarities. Their demographics are similar. They are both teams which have previously enjoyed success, now fall on hard times. But they're both teams which aren't necessarily, while they've had success, they aren't accustomed to that kind of success, and there isn't a demand to have those kind of privileges reinstated straight away. And I think we've talked in the past about how all these things could eventually feed in to Liverpool and benefit Liverpool. FSG have moved, kind of toyed with the possibility of bringing more clubs on board. But my own feeling is that will happen through RedBird itself, and then that relationship with RedBird in turn with Liverpool and FSG will grow. That's my own personal take. There's no kind of no special information behind that, but yeah, I think it's a natural move really for them. Because they said they want about 4 clubs. Malaga, if it does happen, would be their second, and I expect them to possibly look towards Germany and possibly an emerging market league, because we've got this issue soon with Holland and Belgium combining their domestic leagues to form the Beneliga. So I wonder whether there might be quite a bit of US investment coming into that, because the media rights will be far greater because they'll be pooled, and the competition will be a lot stronger. There'll be more eyeballs on it. So, but ultimately, I think the valuations for the clubs will still remain quite low. So I think there'll be US investment there. So that's possibly one to keep an eye on in terms of what RedBird might do next in the football world.
Yeah, interesting. An interesting sort of, you were just saying before there, sort of in the footballing world, because I suppose if you sort of bring, I don't know, baseball together with the Premier League and the marketability the Premier League's had all over the world, you might be able to draw a logical conclusion towards the Indian Premier League cricket. And on that, I see you grinning away there, Dave. I think you like what I did there. In terms of that, that's RedBird's next move, isn't it? Rajasthan Royals.
Yeah, I mean, the Indian Premier League is obviously it's a hugely lucrative competition, enormously popular. That's why the greatest cricket players in the world go to play there. I mean, Ben Stokes plays for the Royals, or he did do most recently, and it's probably kind of an undervalued asset really in terms of how RedBird will look at it. And that's how they look at European football. I mean, these are assets which are ultimately undervalued. I mean, you look at the States, and there isn't a professional franchise, I don't think, in Major League Baseball, the NFL, the NBA, possibly the NHL, that isn't valued at less than $1 billion. So it becomes cost prohibitive in a lot of respects. But I think that, this marks kind of a step change. I mean, they're going to employ the same type of tactics as they have done, I've sought to previously. I mean, there's been a line about how they might lean on Billy Bean a bit to see whether that analytical data approach that proved so successful for Billy Bean and turned him from Billy Bean into Brad Pitt into a Hollywood movie, whether that might lend itself to kind of transfer into cricket. Because obviously that's already happened in football. I mean, you only have to look at, we've got Brentford coming into the Premier League next season, and their whole model is pretty much kind of underpinned by that whole thing. But I think, I don't know how much they'll be seeking to drive it forward to make it this winning, I don't know how much trophies will drive that forward. I think they will see there the fact that it is so popular, certainly kind of with the Indian fan base and the Asian fan base who consume cricket so much, and also has great interest over here in the UK. I mean, it doesn't have the global audience it wants. I mean, certainly not in the likes of the States, but they will know that there'll be plenty of media opportunities and a chance to get in on the rights there and ultimately grow their investment, because they are investors. That's what they're there for. I know all these things arrive with the grand plans of how they'll push things forward, but ultimately it's first and foremost it's there to see a return on that investment, several fold. But I think RedBird are on a real kind of making a concerted effort to make moves in the market at the moment. I think they see the values quite low in terms of sporting entities because of the pandemic. And I think they'll start to possibly look into media organisations. I mean, Jerry Cardinale already owns a significant stake in the Wasserman Media Group, which is is a player agency. I mean, Joe Gomez is part of the Wasserman Group. So there's all these interesting kind of dynamics which are going on. My own personal take is I still think the FSG deal will be what the crux of what their future plans are, because possibly there might be because John Henry and Tom Werner, they're into I think they called it FSG 3.0, so it's the third decade of their tenure. And will they go into 4.0? I don't know. Wealthy businessmen tend to never retire. They just continue to have a seat at the table. I don't know if you ever watched Succession, but yeah, it's very, very much like that. Brian Cox's character in that. I very much see US investors or wealthy businessmen as very much being like that. But I do think Cardinale will see that he's now part of an ownership group that has a stake in Liverpool and the Boston Red Sox, as well as in NASCAR, and they also have kind of strong ties with LeBron James, who's kind of one of the most iconic athletes in global sport. So all these things tying together, I think that seems to be the grand plan. But fully expect RedBird to carry on adding around the edges at what they do. moving forward. And this move with the Royals is the latest step in that, I think.
Yeah, 15% stake in them. Yeah, it all seems adds up, doesn't it? The stake in Liverpool, 85% in Toulouse. So yeah, it's
yeah, and so these things all add up, and it's a lot of money that's been spent this past 12 months. So if you think it was $750 million spent for the stake in FSG, another. What we're talking through, 37.5 million for the Royals, and then on top of what they spent for Toulouse. I mean, it soon racks up. So they're obviously on a mission at the moment, and I don't see that slowing in the short term. I think that, like I've mentioned before, I think that's the valuations are quite low at the moment. Clubs are probably more open to outside investment as a result of the pandemic, so it provides a window of opportunity.
Yeah, RedBird hawking around and looking to swoop you might say. But anyway, let's move on to the final point of our agenda and mention at the top the failed Super League bid. I say failed Super League bid, I suppose, with sort of apostrophes, inverted commas around them, because what's the latest development we've got here, Dave, in terms of Madrid court filing a suit, A22, the company behind sort of the Super League and things, looking to maybe, after all, try and resurrect things, or have I read that wrong?
No, I mean, Florentino Perez, Andrea Agnelli, and Juan Laporta all have kind of bet the house in Vegas almost to make this happen. They're happy to go toe-to-toe with UEFA. They are adamant that they're happy to ostracize themselves from the rest of European football because they are adamant that this is happening, whether UEFA like it or not, whether the clubs like it or not. They're adamant that this is the only way forward for football to thrive. I mean, by football, they mean themselves to thrive. Because ultimately, it's no surprise that those three clubs are significantly impacted by the pandemic, more so than many of those who attempted to sign up. I mean, for Liverpool and United, I very much imagine they were part of that instigating party behind all that, because it's, I mean, you don't have to dig too deep to realise what kind of John Henry's views on media rights and how he kind of, clubs like Liverpool are ultimately the drivers behind why people watch the Champions League, etc. Ultimately, if you take out the 12 teams that were going to go into the Super League, you have the Europa League. And while there is interest in it, the interest isn't anywhere near what it is in the Champions League, because people want to see the biggest, they want to see the best. But yeah, the latest development, A22 is kind of the firm behind the Super League, so the collective group behind the Super League. So they've as soon as the Super League was announced, there was an injunction filed with the Madrid court to prevent UEFA from taking punitive action against clubs for their part in the Super League. That was upheld in the Swiss Ministry of Justice, who basically ruled that UEFA couldn't, for now, dish out any competitive sanctions to the three dissident clubs. So, ergo, that means that Real Madrid, Barcelona and Juventus will be allowed to play in the Champions League next season, which is exactly what they wanted. So they've managed to kind of stick two fingers up in the face of UEFA, but still managed to come to the party. So, but the latest situation is basically trying to have they've asked the Madrid court to look at, and with the possibility of trying to get the sanctions which UEFA imposed on the 9 clubs that came back quashed. So there was a goodwill financial penalty, wasn't it, which went towards grassroots football. I think that was 15 million euros combined. They'll also take a 5% revenue hit this year. So it's kind of a levy, I suppose, on what they would have got from UEFA competition. And that 5%, while it might seem small, it's quite significant when you consider the sums involved with the Champions League. So there's that. That's only for this coming season, by the way. But then crucially, you have the future impact in terms of if they do try and make another Super League move, there would be enormous financial penalties, upwards of 100 million euros, I think. Competitive sanctions again. They had to sign up to a club charter. Now, for all the clubs signed up for this, but the 3 clubs that remain are convinced that those clubs haven't left. Really, this thing is still in existence. No one signed any exit agreement here. They've left in. They've announced that they are leaving in kind of statements alone. There's nothing to say that they are actually left.
Yeah, so they've obviously had the public statements after the backlash of saying we plan to pull out. But what you're saying is they're still signed up to the Super League, but they've also signed the charter with UEFA to say they won't be part of any Super League formation.
Yeah, and moving forward, I mean, they are in the process of, and UEFA have asked them to satisfy their own worries about whether or not they're still involved in the Super League. I mean, it's not simply a case of saying, right, lads, we're off. We don't fancy this anymore. There is a whole legal process which has to be, go through, and we're still only, we're only a month and a half, 2 months down the line from it all. So there's a big legal mess, and while that legal mess is kind of in situ, that provides. This is just a way of these three clubs just prodding and probing and testing the water to try and get the result that they ultimately want. If they won't get this quashed, I don't think. But their argument is that I think they're either trying to curry favour with the 9 clubs, but I suspect that it's probably not what these clubs kind of want the name dragged back into the Super League mix continually. Certainly not in its current guise and the way it's being handled by those 3 clubs. But ultimately, I think it's just pure, it's posturing with UEFA. What I think Barcelona, Real Madrid and Juventus realise that the Super League, as it stands, isn't happening. I think that's, for the time being, it's kicked into the long grass. But further on down the line, remember that term legacy fans? Those fans that go to games and watch games, those fans. I think they'll be banking on, as there is a generational shift in terms of who consumes football, and the opposition becomes less in terms of maybe we'll get to a point where so many people, the people who consume football through social media and devices, etc., they have less interest in maintaining the domestic product than the fans who go and experience the raw emotion of it all. Maybe they're banking on that, but I don't know. Florentino Perez is getting on a bit. I don't know whether he's wise to be carrying on waiting for that game to come to fruition. But I think it's just posturing, and I think that they will just be angling to get what they really want out of all this, which is greater revenue from media rights. And I think possibly by doing this, they might be trying to get some of the teams back on side to try and angle for that, because that's what these clubs want. They want a greater slice, Liverpool included, they want a greater slice of the TV rights that come with the Champions League, because I think they feel that it's not weighted as fairly as it should be in the balance of those who drive the most revenue into the competition itself. But yeah, for now, it's a case of that's been lodged with the Madrid court. Whether that gets escalated to the Swiss ministry, we will wait and see. I mean, they have kind of judiciary over FIFA because it's based in Switzerland anyway, so that's why that decision was handed down. So I'll be interested to see how this plays out. I mean, in reality, Guy, this isn't going anywhere. Not for the rest of this year, not for next year. I mean, it's they may well reach an uneasy truce with UEFA, Barcelona, Juventus and Real Madrid might, but I think it will just be parked for the time being until such time that football finds itself in another existential crisis that can be leveraged to better suit their needs.
Yeah, when football fans want matches to be half an hour or whatever it was, Florentino Perez was suggesting.
4 quarters, yeah.
Yeah. No, I wonder if that has anything to do with advertisement. No, let's move from that. And just finally, what you were saying there in terms of, and I suppose the main attraction for Liverpool of the Super League was sort of the revenue they knew they would definitely be getting from being participants no matter what in Europe's Premier competition, but also, as you say, the broadcasting rights. Now, for the Premier League, they've been signed just at the rate of what the last agreement was. It's already been agreed to. Everyone knows what they're getting, and there won't be any drop in the money. But in terms of, and we spoke about RedBird before, that there's a man on there sort of board in the composition of what they do who has played an awful big part in what the NFL have done previously in sort of their last huge deal that they were able to broker, and now being part of, I suppose, this ownership model within FSG on the RedBird side of things is going to lead to sort of some fascinating sort of maybe developments with what Liverpool are going to be looking to do with maybe down the line their European matches, or I suppose in the end domestic matches too.
Yeah, I mean Kevin LaForce was one of the forces behind the NFL deal. I mean, that deal was struck kind of height of the pandemic, I think, in the States. It's a multi-year deal, so 10 years, $100 billion or $110 billion deal. So that has allowed for the NFL to plan. I mean, that's what Liverpool and kind of FSG, that's what they really like, cost certainty into the future. So that's a 10-year deal, bumper deal for all the teams, negotiated into the middle of a pandemic. I mean, Kevin LaForce wasn't the only person behind that deal, but he was very much a key driver, and he has a lot of fingers in a lot of pies in terms of, he also looked after the equity fund for the league itself. So where they invest kind of the league's pooled money to create more money, which is ultimately what kind of venture capitalists do. So that was really successful, and having him on board at RedBird is a clear statement of intent of where they see themselves. I mean, I think they're going to experience huge growth. I mean, they have all the right people in the right places in the company at the moment. And they're going to become a huge player in global sport, I think. Much like City Football Group try and exert kind of global dominance in terms of the football model, same as Red Bull. Something similar will happen there. I mean, Kevin LaForce will bring with him the ability to negotiate with kind of the biggest and best in the States, find new ways of monetizing content, appealing to a US audience for whether it's a new Premier League deal or all it. Having these type of people on board with so many contacts is invaluable, and I think that he may well play a significant role moving forward. At the moment, it's just with RedBird, there's nothing to suggest it's going to be coming in and kind of sorting out what happens in terms of FSG. But I mean, as I said at the top of it, I think that RedBird's influence at FSG will only grow. So I think it's worth keeping an eye on the kind of the major players behind the scenes at RedBird, because ultimately I think moving forward that they will have a greater say of the direction of FSG and ultimately Liverpool.
Yeah, most definitely. Interesting stuff indeed. Well, that's it then for this edition of The Bottom Line here on the Blood Red channel. Do make sure to register for the Blood Red Club if you're not already part of it. Check out the link in the description. But from myself, Guy Clark, and Dave Powell, thanks a lot for your time and your company. It's bye for now.